the alien princess chose a human, and the empire prepared for war. Birds with wings of silver and gold sang in harmony with the wind, and the soft hum of the city's energy systems created a gentle background melody. Every detail of Lumira reflected centuries of careful design and wisdom. It was a city of wonder, but today, something unusual was about to happen, something that no one in the empire had ever imagined. Princess Elara walked through the corridors of the palace with calm confidence. Her long robes shimmered in the sunlight that filtered through the transparent crystal walls. She moved with elegance, each step measured, each gesture deliberate. Around her, the advisors, nobles, and diplomats whispered softly, their eyes following her every movement. Today was the day of the selection ceremony, an event that determined who would accompany the princess for a diplomatic mission to Earth. For generations, the Lumaran princess had chosen a companion from among their greatest allies. The choice had always been political, carefully designed to strengthen alliances and maintain the empire's influence across the galaxy. Elara, however, had never liked doing things because tradition demanded it. She wanted more. She wanted someone who could see the universe in a way the Lumarans could not. Her thoughts drifted to the visitors from Earth who had arrived in the city a few days earlier. They were a curious species, small in size but full of energy and ideas. Humans, as they were called, had not been in the Empire's records for very long. Many Lumarans considered them primitive. Their technology was clever but simple, their culture chaotic compared to the precision of Lumira. And yet, Elara had noticed something remarkable in their ambassador, Ethan. Ethan had a spark. He looked at the world with curiosity, asking questions that seemed too simple to be important but often revealed truths the Lumarans overlooked. He laughed freely, even in the most formal situations, and he had a way of solving problems that no amount of training could teach. Elara had watched him for days, noting his small gestures, his honesty, and his ability to make people feel comfortable even in a place as intimidating as the royal palace. She knew she wanted him, not because he fit the rules, but because he inspired possibilities. As she entered the grand hall, the murmurs of the court grew louder. Everyone had gathered in anticipation, their robes rustling softly. The hall was vast, with crystal pillars that stretched from floor to ceiling. Above, a domed ceiling reflected the sunlight in patterns that looked like moving stars. The throne of the princess was at the far end, raised slightly on a platform. She took her seat with quiet authority, her eyes scanning the faces before her. The selection ceremony began. One by one, the candidates approached, each bowing with perfect precision. Most were Lumarans, trained in diplomacy, etiquette, and the arts of negotiation. They presented their gifts, made their speeches, and smiled with practiced charm. The court nodded politely, impressed with the displays, but Elara felt none of the excitement she had hoped for. They were all perfect according to tradition, but none of them sparked her imagination. Then, it was Ethan's turn. He stepped forward hesitantly, his human nature showing in the way he fidgeted slightly, unsure how to move in a place that felt so alien. His eyes were wide with wonder as he looked around the hall, taking in the glittering crystals, the intricate patterns, and the floating lights. He carried no gift, no carefully prepared speech. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "I don't know if I belong here," he said, his voice calm but full of honesty. "I've never seen anything like this. I can't promise to follow all your rules perfectly, but I can promise to learn, and I promise to try to help in any way I can." A silence fell over the hall. The court looked at him with shock. How could someone so untrained, so unprepared, stand here and expect to be chosen? Whispers spread like wildfire. Some faces showed amusement, others confusion, and a few, the most conservative counselors, showed clear disapproval. Elara's heart raced. She knew in that moment that this was the choice she wanted. She could feel the energy in Ethan, the raw potential that no one else could match. She raised her hand slightly, signaling for him to step closer. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady, "you will be my companion." The words echoed through the hall. Gasps filled the room. Nobles and counselors exchanged stunned glances. Choosing a human was unprecedented. Some whispered that the princess had lost her mind. Others feared the political consequences. Lord Sivan, a senior advisor known for his strict adherence to tradition, narrowed his eyes, his jaw tightening in anger. "This is unexpected," he said, his voice calm but cold. "Your Highness, surely there are others who are more suitable for this role." Elara met his gaze without hesitation. "I choose Ethan because he sees things differently, because he inspires, because the Empire needs more than tradition, it needs vision." The court fell silent again, the weight of her words sinking in. Some admired her courage, others feared the disruption this decision could bring. Ethan, still standing in front of her, blinked in surprise. He had never imagined such an honor, and yet he felt a sense of purpose rising inside him. The ceremony ended with formalities, but the tension in the court lingered. Elara and Ethan walked through the gardens afterward, surrounded by floating lights and colorful plants. Ethan tried to find words, but none seemed adequate. You really chose me?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I did," Elara said, smiling. "I see something in you that no one else sees, and I believe you can help the Empire in ways we haven't imagined." Ethan looked around, still trying to absorb the beauty and complexity of the place. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. Everything here, it's so different from Earth." "Then you will learn," Elara replied, "and I will learn from you as well. Together we can do more than follow the old ways. We can create something new." As the days passed, Ethan began to explore the palace and the city under Elara's guidance. He marveled at the floating gardens, the crystal towers, and the intricate machines that powered Lumira. He stumbled often, misunderstanding etiquette, asking questions that made the attendants nervous, yet each time, Elara's patience and encouragement helped him adapt. The citizens of Lumira began to notice the human ambassador. At first, there was curiosity. How could a simple human possibly be worthy of the princess? But as they observed Ethan's problem-solving, his willingness to help, and his genuine kindness, some began to admire him. Small acts like helping a gardener repair a broken light or suggesting a new way to organize a floating market made a difference. Slowly, Ethan's presence started to shift the way Lumirans thought. Not everyone welcomed this change. Lord Sivan and a group of traditionalists watched Ethan closely, waiting for a mistake they could use to discredit him. They whispered among themselves, questioning the princess's judgment and predicting disaster. But Elara ignored them. She had chosen Ethan not for approval but for possibility. One evening, Elara and Ethan walked along a terrace overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the crystal towers. Ethan looked out over the horizon, feeling both awe and fear. "This is incredible," he said quietly. "I never imagined a place like this exists, and now I'm part of it." "You are more than part of it," Elara replied. "You are changing it. The Empire is learning from you, even if it doesn't know it yet." Ethan smiled, feeling a mixture of excitement and responsibility. He had never been chosen for anything before, never felt this kind of trust. He wanted to live up to it, to prove that humans could be more than what the galaxy expected. Meanwhile, across the Empire, news of the princess's choice began to spread. Some were curious, others skeptical. Rumors swirled, questions arose, and debates ignited in council chambers. Choosing a human could have far-reaching consequences, some of which even Elara had yet to imagine. But for now, in the Crystal City, there was a sense of possibility. A human ambassador and an alien princess walked together, learning from each other, discovering the strength that could come from unexpected alliances. It was the beginning of something new, something that could change the Empire forever. And as the stars began to shine over Lumira, reflecting in the crystal towers like scattered diamonds, both Elara and Ethan knew that their journey was only beginning. The Empire was watching, the galaxy was waiting, and history was about to be rewritten, not with violence but with courage, creativity, and the unlikeliest of choices. The city of Lumira seemed quieter than usual that morning, but the palace was alive with energy. The air hummed softly with the pulse of the city's energy networks, and the gardens floated gently above the towers, their petals glinting in the soft sunlight. Princess Elara moved through the halls with her usual grace, yet today her mind was restless. The selection ceremony had ended, but the whispers of the court were louder than ever. Choosing a human companion had sent ripples through the empire, and not all of them were favorable. Ethan, meanwhile, was exploring the palace under the guidance of a small group of attendants. He had already learned the basics of etiquette, though he still stumbled occasionally, bowing too low or speaking too casually. Each mistake drew quiet gasps from the more traditional attendants, but Elara always intervened with patience and encouragement. "Don't worry," she told him as he nervously adjusted his robe after knocking over a crystal vase. "You are learning faster than most, and more importantly, you are thinking for yourself. That is what matters." Ethan smiled sheepishly. "I just don't want to make a mistake that could embarrass you or the Empire." "You won't," she replied with a gentle smile. "And even if you did, sometimes mistakes teach more than success ever could." Despite her reassurance, word of Ethan's presence had reached the ears of those in the council who opposed him. Lord Sivan, seated in his dark, polished chamber overlooking the city, frowned as he examined reports from various officials. "A human in this position is dangerous," he muttered to himself. "Not because he is weak, but because he is unpredictable. The princess's choice defies tradition, and tradition is the foundation of our stability." His assistant, a young advisor named Taryn, hesitated before speaking. "Do you think it could work, Lord Sivan? Perhaps the princess sees something we do not." Sivan's eyes narrowed. "It does not matter what she sees. Tradition is not about possibilities, it is about safety. If we allow a human to influence the empire, it could lead to chaos. I will not sit idly by while the foundation of our society is challenged." Far away from the tension of the council chambers, Ethan continued his exploration of Lumira. Today, he was visiting the floating gardens, accompanied by a small guide named Lyra, who seemed eager to show him every detail of the palace's hidden beauty. The gardens were a marvel, plants that glowed softly at night, streams that floated in midair, and bridges that curved gracefully between towers. Ethan was amazed. "I've never seen anything like this," he said, carefully stepping along a bridge that seemed to hang in the sky. "How do you even grow plants like this?" Lyra laughed softly. "Our gardens are designed to adapt. Each plant responds to the energy of the city. It takes careful balance, but it is possible because we understand nature and technology as one. You, of course, come from a world where things are much simpler." "Simple doesn't mean bad," Ethan replied. "Sometimes simpler is better. You see things too perfectly here. Sometimes a little imperfection makes everything more interesting." Elara, who had followed them quietly, smiled at Ethan's words. She had noticed that even in the most structured palace, he had a way of observing without fear or bias. He asked questions that the Lumerans would not dare ask, and he noticed problems no one else would consider. Already she could see the beginnings of change. As the day went on, more humans arrived in the palace for diplomatic meetings. Ethan began interacting with them, showing them the gardens, explaining his observations, and asking questions that even experienced diplomats struggled to answer. His perspective was fresh, and it fascinated the visitors. Meanwhile, back in the council chambers, Lord Sivan's concern deepened. Reports came in that Ethan had suggested a more efficient way to manage the palace's floating platforms, reducing energy consumption by nearly 10%. Other officials praised the idea, but Sivan saw it as a threat. "Every success of the human must be examined," he said to Terran. "We cannot allow the princess to place her trust in something that might destabilize centuries of careful governance. Watch him closely. We must be ready to act if necessary." As tensions rose among the council, life continued in the palace. Ethan spent hours learning from artisans, engineers, and scientists. He asked questions, shared his thoughts, and sometimes suggested simple improvements. Each time, Elara quietly noted his contributions, knowing that the human mind, untethered by the strict rules of tradition, could see possibilities that the Empire had ignored for centuries. One afternoon, while walking through the city's central plaza, Ethan noticed a group of young Lumeran students struggling with a puzzle designed to test problem-solving. Their frustration was evident. "May I?" he asked, kneeling beside them. The students hesitated but nodded. Ethan studied the puzzle, turning pieces in his hands and thinking aloud. He suggested small adjustments, changes that seemed obvious to him but had never occurred to the students. Within minutes, the puzzle was solved, and the students' eyes widened in amazement. "You're very clever," one of them said shyly. Ethan grinned. "I just looked at it differently. Sometimes the simplest way is the best way." The story of Ethan's ingenuity began to spread quietly through the city. Citizens whispered about the human ambassador who could solve problems in ways no Lumeran had considered. Some were skeptical, but many were intrigued. Change, even small, was beginning to stir the Empire in ways no one expected. Yet not everyone welcomed this change. Lord Sivan arranged a meeting with other traditionalists, a private gathering in one of the darker chambers of the palace. "This human," Sivan began, "is stirring unrest without realizing it. The princess may be blinded by curiosity, but we cannot be. We must act before the Empire becomes unstable." One elder spoke up cautiously. "But Lord Sivan, he has not done anything harmful. In fact, he seems to inspire people. Perhaps this is a chance for innovation, not disaster." Sivan's eyes flashed with frustration. "Innovation at the cost of our traditions is not progress. It is chaos disguised as change. We must remind the princess that stability is more valuable than novelty." Back in the palace, Elara and Ethan spent long hours discussing ideas for the Empire. Ethan was fascinated by Lumeran technology, yet he approached it with humility, recognizing how much he had to learn. In return, he offered suggestions that were simple but effective: reorganizing storage areas to save space, designing communication methods that were faster, and even proposing small educational programs for citizens to encourage creativity. Elara noticed how people responded to Ethan's ideas. Guards, attendants, and even high-ranking officials began to smile more, to collaborate more, and to think differently. His influence was subtle but real. One evening, Elara invited Ethan to dine in the palace's observation room. The city sprawled below, a web of light and color. The stars above reflected in the crystal towers, creating the illusion that Lumira floated among the stars themselves. "You are changing things already," Elara said softly. "Do you realize that?" "I hope so," Ethan replied. "I just try to help. I don't want to overstep or cause trouble." "You are not causing trouble," she said firmly. "You are helping people see new possibilities. That is rare, even for us." Their conversation was interrupted by a messenger. The council had requested a meeting to discuss the implications of Ethan's presence. Elara sighed but remained composed. She had expected resistance, and now it was time to face it. In the council chamber, Ethan stood beside Elara. The room was filled with tension. Members of the council whispered quietly, their faces showing suspicion and concern. Lord Sivan stood at the far end, his expression cold and unreadable. "This meeting is called to address the recent events involving the human ambassador," Sivan began. The Empire must consider the consequences of having a human influence the decisions of the princess. Elara met his gaze steadily. Ethan's presence is not a threat. It is an opportunity. He brings a perspective we have lacked, a way of thinking that can help the Empire grow. The council members murmured. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned. But he is human, Sivan said sharply. He does not understand our culture, our history, or our ways. How can we trust him to be a proper companion? Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but confident. I may be human, but I have learned. I have listened. I want to help, not replace. I only hope to offer new ideas, new ways of thinking. If I make mistakes, I will learn. That is all any of us can do, no matter where we come from. A silence fell over the chamber. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Some council members, even those who had doubted him, felt a flicker of respect. Others remained unconvinced, but for the first time the discussion was not about fear or tradition alone, it was about possibility. As the meeting ended, Ethan and Elara walked back through the gardens. The tension of the council lingered, but so did a sense of hope. Change was never easy and some would resist it, but the seeds of transformation had been planted. That night, as the stars shone over Lumira and the city lights reflected like diamonds in the crystal towers, Ethan looked out over the floating gardens. He thought of Earth, of the simple streets and quiet nights he had left behind, and yet he felt a sense of belonging here. He had been chosen for something extraordinary, and he would do his best to rise to the challenge. Elara stood beside him, her hand brushing against his. The Empire is watching us, she said softly. Some will resist, some will doubt, but together we can show them that this choice, our choice, can make the Empire stronger. Ethan nodded, feeling a quiet determination. He may have been from a small, chaotic world, but here, in this alien city, he had found a purpose. And he would not let fear or tradition stand in the way of what could be. As the night deepened, the palace settled into quiet hums of energy. Somewhere in the city, a child laughed, inspired by a puzzle solved in a new way. Somewhere else, an artisan tried a new design inspired by a human suggestion. And somewhere, Lord Sivan watched the palace from afar, his mind working, plotting, resisting, yet already noticing the subtle changes he could not control. The Empire had entered a new chapter, one written not with force or fear, but with curiosity, courage, and the quiet power of seeing the world differently. And at the center of it all stood a human who had been chosen not for tradition, but for potential. It was only the beginning. The Lumaran Empire had always prided itself on its order, its discipline, and the careful planning that had kept it strong for centuries. Yet now, with a human ambassador walking the palace halls, some of that order felt fragile, shifting beneath invisible hands. Ethan had grown accustomed to the whispering eyes and cautious smiles, but he could feel the tension, like a string pulled tight across the Empire's heart. Every conversation, every decision, seemed to ripple farther than he imagined. Elara noticed it too. She had learned long ago that leadership required patience, courage, and the willingness to stand firm in the face of doubt. But even she could not ignore the increasing unrest among the council and the subtle unease spreading through neighboring systems. News of the princess's choice had traveled faster than expected, reaching distant star systems where rival empires and coalitions saw opportunity in Lumira's perceived weakness. That morning, Elara and Ethan walked through the observation terraces overlooking the Crystal City. Ethan's eyes were wide with wonder as usual, but his mind was focused. Do you think the other systems, the ones outside Lumira, understand what this choice really means? He asked. Elara shook her head gently. Some will misunderstand, some will think it is weakness. Others may see it as an opportunity. That is why we must act carefully. Our choices now will shape how the Empire and the galaxy views us. Ethan nodded. Then we need to show them that humans, that I'm not a weakness. You already are not, Elara said firmly. But strength is not just about appearances. It is about ideas, solutions, and unity. That is where you shine. Later that day, they convened a meeting with several key counselors, including some of the more moderate voices who had begun to see the value in Ethan's presence. The chamber was vast, with crystal walls that reflected the morning sun, casting light patterns across the polished floor. Ethan could feel the weight of the room, the centuries of tradition pressing down on him, but he steadied himself. "Our empire is strong," Elara began, "but strength is not measured only by our history. It is measured by our ability to adapt, to solve problems, and to grow. Ethan has already contributed ideas that improve our efficiency, our communication, and even our education. I ask you now to judge not by fear but by results." A counselor, a woman named Luril, leaned forward. "Your Highness, he is indeed clever, and his perspective is unique. I have seen improvements in our logistics since his suggestions were implemented. Citizens are responding positively. Perhaps this experiment has merit." Ethan felt a flush of pride but tried to remain humble. "I only do what I can," he said. "I am learning too. I do not have all the answers, but sometimes seeing things differently helps us discover solutions we could not see before." Lord Sivan, seated at the far end of the table, did not look pleased. His sharp eyes scanned the room. "Different or not, a human cannot replace centuries of experience," he said, "and the neighboring systems are watching. They may interpret this partnership as a weakness. Our enemies may act upon that perception." Elara met his gaze without hesitation. "Then let us show them that humanity's differences are not weaknesses. Let us demonstrate that intelligence, creativity, and courage exist in forms beyond our tradition." The council fell into quiet consideration. Many were curious, some skeptical, but Elara's words carried weight. She was the heir to the empire, and she had always led with a vision that combined wisdom with compassion. If she believed in Ethan, some counselors felt compelled to follow. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began working closely with various departments of the empire. He suggested a new way to organize the archive of interstellar trade agreements, making access faster and easier for diplomats. He helped a team of engineers develop a simple method to monitor energy fluctuations in floating cities, reducing waste and improving stability. And he even collaborated with educators to design programs that encouraged children to think creatively, not just memorize facts. The results were subtle at first but undeniable. Citizens began to speak of the human ambassador with curiosity and admiration. Reports from lower-level officials praised his ideas, noting that morale and efficiency had improved. Even some of the counselors who had been hesitant started to see the value in his contributions. Yet, as expected, resistance remained. Lord Sivan and his allies worked quietly behind the scenes, sending messages to neighboring systems, warning them of what they framed as instability within the empire. These rival systems watched closely, calculating how to use the empire's supposed weakness to their advantage. One afternoon, an urgent message arrived from a nearby star system that had long been allied with Lumira. Their energy grids, responsible for controlling the climate and communication satellites across several planets, were failing. The problem was complex, the cause unclear, and the situation had the potential to escalate into widespread disruption. Elara called a meeting immediately. Ethan was brought in, his human perspective considered a valuable asset. Counselors whispered nervously. A human, they feared, might not understand the intricate systems of interstellar technology, but Elara trusted Ethan. "This is unprecedented," Sivan said, his voice tight. "The problem is technical, beyond human understanding." "Are we to place the Empire's stability in his hands?" "Yes," Elara said simply, "because humans see differently, and sometimes a different perspective is exactly what we need." Ethan studied the reports carefully. The data was overwhelming at first. energy fluctuations, irregular satellite feedback, and complex interactions between planets' atmospheres. But he noticed patterns that others had overlooked. Small inconsistencies in the energy readings pointed to a timing mismatch between satellites and planetary grids, a problem caused by the rigidity of traditional methods. "This is a timing issue," he explained. "The systems are designed perfectly, but they cannot adjust to natural variations. If we introduce small adaptive cycles, the grids will synchronize naturally." The counselors were skeptical. "Adaptive cycles?" one asked. "We have never used such methods in our systems." Ethan nodded. "Because you are used to following rules exactly. Sometimes systems need flexibility, not perfection. I can implement this adjustment safely." After careful deliberation and Elara's firm support, Ethan's plan was approved. Working with engineers and technicians, he guided the implementation of adaptive cycles across the grids. It took hours of careful coordination, but the results were immediate. Energy fluctuations stabilized, communication satellites realigned, and planetary climates returned to normal. The Empire celebrated quietly. Citizens praised the princess for her wise choice, and many counselors began to reconsider their skepticism. Even Lord Sivan could not deny the success, though he remained cautious, his face unreadable. "This human," Sivan muttered to himself. "He may be clever, but this does not mean he belongs here permanently. We must remain vigilant." Despite the tension, Ethan felt a growing sense of confidence. He had proven, at least in one critical situation, that human creativity and perspective were valuable. Elara smiled at him privately, pride shining in her eyes. "You have done more than I imagined," she said. "The Empire is learning from you, and so am I." Ethan shook his head, humility in his expression. "I just did what I could. The real work was done by the people following my suggestions. They made it happen." "Yes," Elara agreed, "but ideas are the first step. Without your courage to suggest them, nothing would have changed. And that courage is rare, no matter the species." As word of the successful intervention spread, the neighboring systems began to take notice. Some approached Lumira cautiously, intrigued by the innovative approach. Others remained wary, still expecting weakness, but the story of a human solving a complex interstellar problem traveled fast. The Empire's reputation began to shift, not because of tradition but because of results. In the palace, Ethan continued his daily routines, learning, observing, and contributing wherever he could. He visited schools, spoke with engineers, and explored areas of the city that had once seemed inaccessible. Each day, he found new ways to see the world differently and to help others see the possibilities in change. Meanwhile, the council remained divided. Some members embraced the transformation, quietly adjusting their expectations. Others, led by Sivan, watched with suspicion, plotting ways to regain control if the human influence grew too strong. But for every skeptic, there was now a citizen, an artisan, or a young student inspired by a human's ideas, a small but growing wave of change that could not easily be stopped. One evening, Elara and Ethan walked through the palace gardens, the floating paths glowing softly beneath their feet. The city shimmered around them, a testament to centuries of careful thought and design. Ethan felt a quiet sense of belonging, a feeling he had never experienced on Earth. "You've changed things here," Elara said softly, her hand brushing his. "The Empire is not just stronger because of technology, but because it is learning to see differently. That is a gift humans can give." "I hope I'm helping," Ethan replied. "I don't want to make mistakes that hurt anyone." "You will make mistakes," she said with a gentle smile. "But even mistakes teach lessons, and even then humans have a way of turning mistakes into progress. That is why I chose you." Ethan looked out over the city, the lights reflecting like stars across the crystal towers. He thought of Earth, of the familiar streets and nights he had left behind, and felt a strange mix of nostalgia and purpose. Here, in this alien city, he had found a place where curiosity, creativity, and courage mattered as much as tradition. And as the stars above Lumira shone brightly, Ethan realized that the journey was far from over. Rival systems were still watching, counselors were still skeptical, and challenges awaited at every turn. But for the first time, he felt ready, not because he had all the answers, but because he was willing to see differently, to act boldly, and to learn alongside those who trusted him. The Empire was entering a new era, one not of conquest or fear, but of ideas, ingenuity, and unexpected alliances. And at the heart of it all was a human who had been chosen not for status, not for tradition, but for vision. It was the beginning of a larger story, one that would test the courage of a princess, the creativity of a human, and the resilience of an empire ready to embrace a future that no one had imagined. The city of Lumira shimmered under the soft light of its twin moons, casting long reflections across the crystal towers and floating gardens. The hum of the city's energy systems was calm, almost melodic, but beneath the serenity, the palace was alive with activity. The council had convened again, this time to address a matter that could define the future of the empire and its relations with neighboring systems. Princess Elara moved gracefully through the halls, her robes flowing like liquid light. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of a ruler who knew the weight of her choices. Beside her, Ethan walked carefully, still adjusting to the rhythms of Lumira, but growing increasingly comfortable in his role. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of learning, proving, and subtly influencing the Empire in ways neither of them had fully anticipated. "Do you feel ready?" Elara asked softly, her hand brushing Ethan's as they entered the council chamber. Ethan paused, glancing around the vast room filled with crystal panels and holographic displays. "I think so," he replied. "I've learned a lot, but there's still so much to understand, and the council, some of them don't trust me." "Trust is built over time," she said, smiling, "and sometimes it is demonstrated by results, not words. Today we have a chance to show them that our choice, our partnership, can benefit the Empire." The council chamber was unusually crowded. Ambassadors from neighboring systems had been invited, some curious, some skeptical, to observe the Empire's decision-making firsthand. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that comes before a critical turning point. Lord Sivan sat at the far end, his expression composed but his eyes sharp, calculating every move. Elara rose to address the assembly. "We are faced with a challenge that affects not only Lumira, but our allies across several systems. The energy grids of multiple planets are experiencing instability, affecting communication, climate control, and daily life. We must find a solution that ensures stability, cooperation, and progress." A murmur ran through the council. Many expected a complicated plan involving hundreds of engineers, months of preparation, and strict adherence to traditional methods. But Elara had other plans. Ethan stepped forward, his hands slightly shaking, but his voice steady. "I've studied the problem," he began, "and I believe the solution lies not in simply following old methods, but in combining precision with adaptability. The grids are designed to function perfectly under fixed conditions, but the universe is never perfectly fixed. Small adjustments, responsive cycles, and cooperative synchronization between planets can stabilize the systems naturally." A silence followed. Some counselors frowned at the simplicity of the explanation, expecting technical jargon and complex algorithms. Yet others leaned in, intrigued by the clarity and practicality of his words. Even the ambassadors from neighboring systems exchanged glances, curious about this human's perspective. Lord Sivan's voice cut sharply through the chamber. "Your Highness, a human suggesting a solution for interstellar systems is unprecedented. We cannot base our empire's stability on someone without centuries of experience in our science. Elara's gaze was unwavering. Lord Sivan, experience alone does not guarantee solutions. Innovation and understanding are just as important. Ethan has studied the problem, proposed a solution that respects the science of the Empire, and demonstrated adaptability that none of us would have expected. That is why I support his plan. With her approval, the Council allowed Ethan to implement his strategy. Teams of engineers and technicians were assembled under his guidance, and he worked tirelessly, consulting with experts while introducing his ideas gently but firmly. He suggested reprogramming satellites for adaptive cycles, adjusting planetary grids incrementally, and testing solutions on smaller scales before scaling them up. The process was meticulous, demanding precision and attention. Ethan moved through the teams with humility, listening carefully, asking questions, and learning as much as he contributed. He did not command, he collaborated. Slowly, the plan took shape. By the second day, initial adjustments were showing signs of success. Energy readings stabilized, communication signals cleared, and minor climate disturbances corrected themselves naturally. Counselors who had doubted him began to nod in quiet approval, and ambassadors from neighboring systems observed with growing respect. One ambassador leaned toward another. I did not expect this human to understand our systems so quickly. Perhaps we underestimated them. Ethan worked long into the night, the glow of the city reflecting in the crystal walls around him. Despite the fatigue, he felt exhilaration. He was not only solving problems, he was helping people, demonstrating that human ingenuity could complement the Empire's advanced technology. Elara stayed nearby, offering encouragement and insight, guiding him gently through the cultural nuances that he still sometimes missed. "You've done more than I imagined," she said softly. "The Empire is learning from you." Ethan shook his head. "I just tried to see things differently. You gave me the chance to do that. Without your trust, none of this would be possible." By the third day, the system-wide stabilization was complete. The energy grids across the affected planets were functioning smoothly, communications were uninterrupted, and the citizens experienced no further disruption. Reports of success reached the Council and the Princess, and even Lord Sivan could not suppress a reluctant acknowledgement of the human's effectiveness. "This is impressive," he muttered quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "Perhaps we have judged too quickly." Elara allowed a small smile but did not let the moment distract her. She knew that true acceptance would take time, especially among those steeped in centuries of tradition. But she also knew that results spoke louder than arguments. The Empire had witnessed the potential of collaboration between human creativity and Lumeran precision. In the days that followed, Ethan continued to work with engineers, educators, and administrators. He proposed improvements to communication networks, suggested new educational programs to encourage critical thinking, and even shared insights on human collaboration techniques that increased efficiency and morale. Each contribution was small but impactful, and cumulatively, the Empire began to feel the subtle effects of his presence. Citizens started to notice. Artisans, students, and technicians spoke of a human who encouraged curiosity, welcomed mistakes, and inspired them to think in new ways. A quiet revolution of ideas was taking root, one not enforced by authority but cultivated by example. Lord Sivan, observing these changes, felt a mixture of irritation and grudging respect. He continued to question Ethan's role, but he could not deny the results. The Empire was functioning more efficiently, citizens were engaged, and neighboring systems were beginning to view Lumira as not only technologically advanced but creatively adaptive. One evening, Elara and Ethan walked together through the floating gardens. The moons reflected softly on the glassy streams, and the lights from the city below shimmered like stars. Ethan paused to take it all in, feeling a profound sense of belonging he had never known on Earth. "You've changed things here," Elara said gently. "The Empire is stronger because of your ideas, your courage, and your perspective. People are starting to see what I saw in you from the beginning." Ethan shook his head, humility clear in his expression. "I just did what I could. The real change comes from everyone around me, following the ideas and making them work." "Yes," Elara replied, "but ideas need someone to introduce them. You did that, and that is what matters." For the first time, Ethan felt a deep sense of purpose. He realized that being human did not mean being weak or limited. His perspective, his creativity, and his willingness to take risks were valuable. The Empire had underestimated humans, and now, in this city of crystal and light, they had witnessed the truth. Across the Empire, whispers of the human ambassador spread. Citizens shared stories of his ingenuity, educators told students about his problem-solving, and technicians recounted his guidance on complex projects. The Empire began to see humanity not as a novelty, but as a partner capable of shaping a new era. Even Lord Sivan could not remain entirely opposed. He continued to voice concerns, but he also found himself reconsidering some of his positions. Change was difficult for him, but undeniable results were impossible to ignore. The neighboring systems, initially skeptical, began to adjust their perceptions. Some approached Lumira with offers of collaboration, intrigued by the Empire's willingness to embrace new ideas. Others, still cautious, observed closely, recognizing that Lumira had demonstrated the power of creativity combined with tradition. One afternoon, Ethan and Elara attended a council assembly where representatives from several allied systems had gathered. Ethan spoke confidently about the recent success, explaining the methods used to stabilize the grids and highlighting the collaboration between humans and Lumarans. His clear, practical explanation impressed the delegates, many of whom had expected an overly complex, rigid approach. Elara watched him with pride. Her choice had been questioned, doubted, and even criticized, but it had proven wise. Humans, she realized, had a gift that went beyond technology or tradition. They brought perspective, creativity, and courage that could inspire even the most structured society. As the assembly concluded, ambassadors approached Ethan to ask questions, offer suggestions, and even request guidance for their own systems. The human ambassador had become more than a visitor. He had become a symbol of possibility, bridging worlds and inspiring collaboration. That evening, Ethan and Elara stood on a terrace overlooking the Crystal City. The lights below glimmered, the floating gardens shimmered, and the stars above reflected in the towers like scattered diamonds. "The Empire is changing," Ethan said quietly. "Not because of me alone, but because people are willing to try new ways. That feels incredible." Elara placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "It is incredible, and it is only the beginning. Together, we have shown that strength is not only in tradition, but in courage, curiosity, and partnership. The Empire, and perhaps the galaxy, has a new path." Ethan looked out over the city, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of possibility. He thought of Earth, of the quiet nights he had left behind, and realized that his journey had brought him to a place where he truly mattered. He had been chosen, not for status, not for wealth, but for vision, and he had proven that humans could rise to the challenge. Elara smiled at him, sensing his thoughts. "The Empire is watching, the galaxy is watching, and history is watching. And we have chosen to see differently. That is our greatest strength." As the moons rose higher, casting silver light over the city, Ethan and Elara stood side by side, ready for the future. The Empire had been tested not by battle, but by innovation, understanding, and collaboration. Challenges would come, of course, but for the first time, Lumira faced the future with hope, curiosity, and the knowledge that humans had a place among the stars. And so, the story of a human ambassador and an alien princess came to a turning point. What had begun as an unexpected choice had grown into a testament of possibility, courage, and vision. Lumira would never be the same, and neither would the galaxy. Ethan understood now that being human was not a limitation, it was an advantage. Creativity, adaptability, and empathy could move worlds. And with Princess Elara by his side, he felt confident that the Empire could face any challenge, embrace any change, and thrive in ways that no one had imagined. As the city of crystals glowed beneath them, Ethan whispered softly, almost to himself, "This is only the beginning." Elara squeezed his hand gently. "Yes, and together we will write the rest of the story." The stars above Lumira seemed to shine brighter that night, reflecting a future filled with hope, collaboration, and the extraordinary potential of beings from different worlds. The Empire had chosen vision over fear, curiosity over stagnation, and humanity had proved itself worthy. And somewhere in the galaxy, distant systems watched, waiting to see how this unprecedented alliance would shape the future of countless worlds. The era of collaboration, ingenuity, and understanding had begun, and Lumira stood at its center, led by a princess who dared to see differently, and a human who dared to rise to the challenge. The alien princess chose a human, and the Empire prepared for war.